Baxty, at this point, bruv, love him or hate him, I am in awe of this chap, especially when you start to understand, get into the weeds of the why and the how. Because a lot of these other drivers, minus Alonso and Lewis, can't do this, Baxty. They
No,
can't
they
do it.
can't. This was the finest example of human and machine perfectly melding together for a moment. And I think in terms of a Red Bull, I don't think I've ever seen it done better. If Lance is holding Fernando up, I can see Alonso going, get him out of the way now. And then
Oof.
this is where the blow up comes. This is me going full chaos merchant here, but I would love to hear Mike Crack come on the radio and say, Lance, move out the way. I would
Alonso's faster than you.
love to hear that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown. With me, as always, my esteemed colleague, my right honourable colleague, my co-host, Baxty B, of one of the best F1 channels on YouTube's Baxty B F1. How are you doing, sir? You right?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I've had a long rehearsal week, but it's great to sit down and chat F1 as we're on the verge of Spain, and we can chinwank about Monaco as well, which would be good.
Let's
So
go,
yeah,
mate. First things first, then, mate. Apologies to all of the peddlers out there in the YouTube's sphere, because we had an absolute banger of an episode ready to go, but Cameron F1 had something dodgy happen with his microphone. We need to let's talk about Monaco first, because there's a topic, there's something that I've got on my chest, Baxty, which I feel needs addressing. I spoke about it on Cameron F1 Live for about 40 minutes, and I was desperately trying to wrap my head around what we saw Max Verstappen do in Sector 3 last weekend. Now, I know that there's been a bit of evidence to the contrary. Of course, Alonso didn't have a great Sector 3. Of course, Max Verstappen's RB19 is a rocket ship. But Baxty, tell me, for the avoidance of doubt, did we see greatness from Max Verstappen's Sector 3 Monaco last weekend in Quali?
oh, undoubtedly, yeah. I mean, it was unbelievable. I think people have known me long enough now to know that I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan, and he is my guy. But when you see something like that, you have to praise it. It was absolutely unbelievable. I think nuance is always what makes sports so good. You've mentioned a lot of it there. Alonso had a crap sector three. Yeah, he had the joint slowest sector three with George Russell, and then you had Max's crap first two sectors. And yeah, I know there's been the theory that he bought the tires into it and had his tires were prime in that third sector. But what made it so special was that he was inch perfect on his apexes and on his corners. It was just incredible precision. And I described it at the time as Hamilton-esque. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as the biggest compliment I can
Love that.
give because how many times have we seen Lewis pull something out the bag
Love it.
just out of nowhere? And Max did that on Saturday. It was an incredible qualifying performance. I think one of the very, very best. Yeah, I've seen some people saying it's the best at Monaco ever. Senna 88 will never be touched. Like,
Oh,
let's be frank.
oh, let's
that, that
go.
that sequence of laps that he put in when he was just basically not driving the car, he was just there. Extraordinary. But yeah, I think that was the best qualifying lap of Max's career,
Oh,
without a doubt.
oof.
And I think it showed how good he is. It was a turn of speed that we haven't seen from him, and I feel like he's upping his game a little bit as well.
True,
I
true.
feel, and that this was the first big shot to say, okay, you all know I'm going to win this year, but I'm going to destroy you, and here's how. And it was just a beautiful moment of the human being the key element in the lap, not the machine.
Oh, I love what you said there, Baxty. Getting a bit biblical and spiritual about our sport. I was lost for words in real time, Baxi. I just didn't understand. Going as soon as you see plus point two at the end of sector two, everybody can go home, right? Alonso's dropped it on pole, and more than likely he's going to win on Sunday. That's just how Monaco works. I discounted it. And the beauty of sports and F1 in particular is that these guys, and Max Verstappen and Lewis in particular, right, have the tendency to be able to do these things and make you have to reimagine what you define as possible and impossible. I just didn't see him doing it. And interestingly, Baxter, you've touched on a couple salient points there. I've watched it back a gazillion times, and I disagree with you ever so slightly. I'm not sure that was Max Verstappen's best lap, best sector three by
Of
hundred
course, yeah.
thousand miles. But sector one and sector two, I don't think were that fantastic. And I think the interesting point around that is whether that was deliberate or otherwise. Because, like you said, there are theories being bandied around on the internet that Max wasn't even pushing it very hard, right? Like on the sequence, like sector one, like just before the tunnel, like he wasn't even hitting apexes. Now you could argue that potentially isn't the fastest line in Monaco, but to my noddy eye, he didn't even look like he was pushing it. So maybe he was bringing his tires to and doing exactly the opposite of what Fernando Alonso did. And then what I will bend the knee to your point is this, Baxty. I saw the entry, so the first part of swimming pool, like the left and then the left, the jinking left and then the right. And I thought that had to be, because to my eye, that looked like Tron, Baxty. That didn't even look like that
Yeah.
could be real. You've taken far too much pace through there, and you're going to, similar to Jeddah Sector 1, Sector 2,
Yeah,
2021,
yeah,
right? It looked like you'd taken far too much pace through there, and you were going to stack it, because you can't drive any car, even if it is an F1 car, through those turns at that speed. And he sticks it. He doesn't stack it, does exactly the opposite. Baxty, my surprise is that when you look at the onboard of or the back to back of Alonso versus Max, it's not, he didn't gain the time where I thought he'd gain the time. Not the first swimming pool portion. He gains the time at Raskas and
yeah.
and the right and the left. That's the second part of swimming pool. Okay, so he was very, very tight on the right and the left portion.
Yeah.
But this is where, Baxty, I have to confess, my eye is not my eye is not educated enough to pick up on these nuanced points. I didn't think that he'd gained at Raskas, but that was pretty much where he gained all the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as I said, I'm going to take what I said a step further about the human. This was the finest example of human and machine perfectly melding together for a moment. And I think in terms of a Red Bull, I don't think I've ever seen it done better. We've seen it in Mercedes and Ferraris, but in a Red Bull, I mean, Seb was good, but this was something else. Um, we know how good that Red Bull is coming out of the corner, but you still have to have a driver with God level skills to execute that level of commitment, to have it on the rails. And it was perfection. That sector 3 was perfection. I know some people have tried to say stick it onto the end of Jeddah 21. I don't, get out, get in the bin. But that one moment was just a driver being at one with his car and just executing to absolute perfection.
Baxter, I love it, mate. I do like to get a bit profound about our sport. I do. And to be fair to you, Baxter, I was one of those who said in my hyperbole that it's almost like the racing gods demanded a sector 3 off of Max Verstappen, akin that could slot in alongside the Jeddah. Do you know what I mean? It had to be commensurate. That was the sector that he'd owed us, right? And they owed the racing gods. It was almost like it was a debt to be paid. Finally, on this, Baxter, we'll say that it's quite interesting. Again, I think this is one of, and again, Bryson always says that one needs to be, as far as F1's concerned, one should be humble before nature, right? And I think this is a time when I need to be humble about all of what I don't know. I would defer to my guy Peter Windsor here, who's took some stills. He was at Monaco live in person, and he took some stills of Max Verstappen's line through Raskas. And again, as we get onto the Spanish Grand Prix stuff, this has flipped reverse massively. He's long said that Max Verstappen's gift is being able to short the corner. So the Raskas is a brilliant example. Normally, these drivers will take a wide line on Raskas with a view to get on the loud pedal as quickly as possible, right? And not to exact too much of a toll from the tires. Max Verstappen's gift, as far as his handling dynamic and ability to control the car on the ragged edge, is such that he doesn't need to do that, Baxty. He takes the shortest possible line through the corner, and still, whilst many of the other guys on the grid, probably 15 to 18 of them, would experience understeering doing that. He does it and produces this god tier, gains 3/10 on Alonso in a 20-second or less sector. Baxty, at this point, bruv, love him or hate him, I am in awe of this chap, especially when you start to understand, get into the weeds of the why and the how, because a lot of these other drivers, minus Alonso and Lewis, can't do this, Baxty.
No, they can't.
It, bruv.
No. I mean, I've always been an admirer of Max as a driver. I don't personally like the guy. I think the way he operates outside of the car, the culture that's around him, that's not for me. I don't like that. And we saw that in Baku when somebody does go too far with the way that they operate. But in the car, you can't fault the guy. Like he's unbelievable. And I feel like what we saw last weekend and what we've also seen so far this weekend is Max just turning the screw on the field a little bit, just going, I've got the best car. I know I've got the best car. Checo Perez has had his little moment. I'm going to destroy you all now. And I think he wants to do to the field, again, what he did last year, but also what he Seb did in 2013. I think he's going to try and gun for Seb's record, I think.
He is absolutely turning the screw, this lad. And a point that you mentioned, Baxty, that this again is my Achilles heel. It feels like a bit of a Cameron F1 confession here, repenting for my sins. This, when somebody's so good so often, Baxty, I completely agree with you. I'm not sure that Max as a person is to my taste outside the cockpit. Now, everybody that's worked with him that I know says he's a really, really nice guy, and that don't buy the hype that the media is selling you that he's a bit of a douchebag. And again, I will defer to them. But what I see from a distance, I'm not sure that Max would be the first driver on the grid that I'd take for a cheeky beverage, if not to pick his brain about his process and how he's doing these crazy things. However, Baxty, the way that I've always watched F1, I'm a bit of not a glory supporter, but I forget all of that, that kind of wheat. Like I just don't, it fades to black for me. Because again, when I see a Monaco Sector 3, and let's move on to Spain, when I see these sort of performances, I just get honestly, Baxty, that's why I get up in the morning. That's why I watch F1 and sports more broadly, because I've watched it for so long that you see these things, these great performances in inverted commas, and it just it smells and tastes different, doesn't it, Baxty? Like it just looks impossible is the best way I can term it.
Yeah, I mean, we're both Lewis fans primarily, and we've been very blessed for years that we've seen Lewis do just things time and time again. And we're seeing the next generation emerge, and Charles Leclerc's shown glimpses of it, but not quite got there yet. And with Max, he's starting to really come into his own. We said at the start of the season, have we seen peak Max Verstappen? And I think we might just be starting to see it now. And that's a scary thought that he's still getting better. And one thing we haven't mentioned is in the race itself.
Oh my gosh!
The 55 lap stint on the mediums. I mean, that's absurd.
What are we doing?
I mean, I get, there are question marks of, hang on, Pirellis need to perhaps look at their tyres, but still to do that for 55 laps is incredible. I know I've seen the arguments to say, oh, he was in clear air, but you're in Monaco. Anything could go wrong at any minute. You're on road, legal road car, just normal tarmac. This isn't a specific racing tarmac. So the tyres are going to take a bit more damage. And to nurse those tyres for 55 laps while still gapping Alonso.
The fella's incredible, man. That you've nailed it, Baxty. And I just never... Nasher of Quick Stop F1, the legend that is, used a very good word about the qualifying performance. And I think this summarises where Max Verstappen is for me at the moment. He's inevitable, Baxty. I never once. That was a very... the Monaco race was fraught with danger, right? And tropiezos, to use the Spanish term, stumbling blocks or potential. There were loads of them, the changing conditions, the tyre deck, and he just navigate. Not one... Baxter, I'll pose the question to you. Was there one point in the race last week where you thought for a second that Max might be in trouble here?
There was actually, yeah, because I think Alonso's strategy was geared to sort of overcutting him with the hard tyres. And I think when the rain started coming down, I thought that was the window for Aston. And unfortunately, they made the wrong call to go on to the mediums. And then obviously that backfired massively and they lost a lot of time to Max, and that was race over. But just as the rain started to come, I thought this was Alonso's moment that he could get him with a well timed pit stop. And I think if they put him straight on the inters, I think he could have jumped him. But that was the only time. Once they were both on the inters,
no chance, mate.
No chance. I mean, I know Max was sliding around a bit, but everyone was. I mean, the conditions were awful out there. So
he just manages it though. Baxter. Okay, so he did have a couple of hairy moments.
Yeah, but even everyone did,
mate. Even so, like, there's a comedian that cracks a joke, right? You know, when you if you're on an airplane and you're in turbulence, the tonality of the pilot, it gives you security, right? It gives you like where you're stressed out and the turbulence is you if you hear a calm tone from the pilot, it kind of reassures you. And I get that's the best analogy that I can give for Max, because every time they talk to him, GP's his engineer, Max is just like, well, the GP said to him, well, just stay out until you can't stay out, right? Come in when you can't keep it on the black stuff. And Max, I don't even think he responded. He's just, oh, Baxty, step away from the altar of Max praise. Come on, go on.
I'm going to say one more thing. I said in a previous episode, which is available on all good podcasting platforms, I said that Max had gone into my top 10 above Seb. And that's where he's been. But I think what we saw last weekend puts him above my number 9, who is now number 10, obviously, being Fernando Alonso. So it goes Fernando at 10, Max at 9. Because I just think he's won more races. They've won the same amount of championships. And I think Max has shown more to me. I respect Alonso as I do. And I would love for him to get his 33rd win, which is going to become a thing, I think, this season. But that was Max showed just... The way to describe it is the great shock you. They find ways to continually shock you. And we've seen this for years with Lewis. Years and years and years. Schumacher did it. Senna did it. That's why they're my top 3 in that order. But Max is starting to get there. And I think his ceiling is still a long way up the way.
Levels, Baxty. Levels is the thing. It is a very, very scary proposition for the other 19 on the grid currently, that this dude probably hasn't yet reached his zenith, probably not even close. Over the next couple of years, we're going to see some craziness from this fella. And of course, at the Spanish Grand Prix this weekend, it feels like he's done another one. And again, brilliant wheels underneath him, but he's inevitable. Baxty was never in doubt for the pole, was it?
No, he topped every session and just he looked easy. I think the only thing I think that maybe could have stopped him was rain, but even then it was just, I think this weekend was definitely him taking advantage of having a quick car and being that little bit quicker than Checo Perez, who had a shocker. He was all over the place again.
God, what is he doing?
But because somebody did a comparison on Twitter of where Max was quickest, and actually Max was quickest on the straights, whereas the likes of Gasly and Hamilton were slightly quicker than Max through the corner. But it was the speed that he's carrying and his way through those corners that he's just got such an advantage on everyone. And it's, the best hope for anyone to have a competitive race tomorrow is either Red Bull go wrong with strategy or Carlos Sainz takes him into turn 1, which I don't see happening, not on that long straight.
Wow, good luck for beating Max Verstappen. It's interesting that you raised the point that some of those other drivers were quicker than him through the turns. I was just listening to my guy Peter, and he's talked, and again, he talks in a different language about F1 that I don't quite understand. Baxley, I'm not sure that Max isn't taking a very different approach to Spain than he was in Monaco, in that Monaco was very short corners, going the shortest way and then managing the understeer as he does so brilliantly. Spain, though, I think, to your point earlier, I think there's something to be said about tyre management that both him and Lewis, according to Peter, because again, he sees these things and my noddy eye does not, that these guys are deliberately working the harder compound tyres that Pirelli have brought to Spain. Are you seeing that same thing, Baxty?
Yeah, mate. Yeah, I think so. I mean, Max was only what 3 tenths quicker than Science, or 4 tenths. I can't quite remember. But I mean, he was going to go a lot quicker. I mean, he did a 1:12.2, and he was going to go 1:11 certainly. But he backed out of it because he didn't need to. He already had it in the bag. But I think his management of tires is getting a lot better. I don't know if he's learning that from Checo. I don't know, or he's just
Oh,
learning it himself.
if there was anything to learn, one thing that you could potentially pick up from Checo
Yeah.
being so piss poor over the past 2 or 3 weeks, then
Oh
that
God,
would
yeah, yeah,
be it.
yeah.
What's going on with Checo, Baxter, before we get onto the guys from
Well,
Brax?
he's realised he had half a chance of being world champion, and he just bottled it. Really, I mean,
Did he?
Miami, I think, was the psychological blow.
Mm.
You know, he qualified on pole. Max made a mistake, and he didn't take advantage of it. You know, Max came from ninth on the grid, hammered him into submission, and I feel like that was that was the key moment. And then Checo, crap in qualifying in Monaco, crap in qualifying today. Yeah, and he was crap in the race as well in Monaco. I mean, I gave
Just
him donkey of the day, but
just
and
crap. Full stop.
he's on the verge of it again. I think Pierre Gasly may have done him a favour, but he's on the verge of it. Like, Jesus Christ.
Just crap. That's a good word.
Yeah.
He's been very crap for a very long time, and I think Miami is the salient point. That's I still, speaking of not understanding things, you have to be very crap, or at least let me be more respectful of the Mexican Minister of Defense. The difference between you and your teammate has to be very, very large material delta. If you start on pole in Miami, your teammate starts in ninth. There is a race where there is no safety car, and yet and still your teammate from ninth still beats you with time in hand. That is bonkers, Baxty.
Yeah.
And you know what, bruv? I think you're right. That was the seminal moment. It was always going to go
Yeah.
this way. Shall we
Yeah.
talk? Shall we talk to the boys from Brackley and Brixworth? What's going on? What
Ooh.
is going on? So for those that
Okay.
didn't watch, it got a bit techie, as it always was going to get at some point this season, between King George Russell of Kings in Norfolk and Sir Lewis Hamilton of Stevenage, because they were both warming up, gearing up for a hot lap on the start-finish straight. George was getting a cheeky toe from the Ferrari in front of him, which meant that he kind of, as Lewis was looking at it, it looked like he was kind of trying to let him through down the outside. But it turns out that he wasn't, because he was after the toe from the Ferrari. And then at the last minute, George, not quite last minute, but George, with a view to sight the impending right-hander, veers isn't the right word, but drifts ever so slightly out to the left, and I don't want to say takes out Lewis, but collides with Lewis in what Baxty, luckily for all of us, could have been a horror show of an incident. I had visions of Gilles Villeneuve's incident, right? At Zandor, like those accidents where we're colliding at massive speed.
Yeah.
Ultimately the most dangerous that you can have in F1. Characterize for me that incident, Baxty, and if you're laying blame and culpability, at whose door are you laying it?
I mean, ultimately, the fault is George's, because he was the one that turned in to Lewis. But I think we have to lay blame at the Mercedes pit wall. I've read so they were both summoned before the stewards. I've read the documentation. George was actually given a warning. He's not been given a penalty for the incident, which I've seen some people kind of raising their eyebrows at. But honestly, I think it was the right call, because George was not warned that Lewis was behind him. I've seen suggestion that, he knew he was there. I don't think he did. I think when you're in qualifying mode, you are so focused. And he probably didn't realize Lewis was as close as he was. Lewis probably thought he was getting a tow from George and then decided to make the move. I think the Mercedes pit wall should have managed that situation better so as to avoid that collision happening. They could have communicated with both drivers better, and they didn't do that. Toto said it was a communication error. The stewards seem to have accepted that. They've listened to the radio, certainly more radio than we would have access to as well. So George is at fault, because ultimately he did drive into Lewis, but I think we also have to say, sorry, Mercedes, yourself, slap on the wrist. That was bad.
Yeah, it's all an SH1T show, isn't it, Baxty? And again,
Yeah.
I think myself, I was going to condemn Mercedes to death here and talk about the frequency with which they've dropped the ball, but they haven't been too bad of late, so I won't do that. What I will say, I agree with you, Baxty. I think it's sad again, and I went off on a bit of a rant about Max Verstappen last week. It's sad that there are sideline merchants just waiting for something like this to happen so that they can throw the book and tomatoes and anything else that they've got in their hands at George Russell. I'm like, can we not have a bit of a, can we not be a bit objective? Can we not just take off our Sir Lewis Hamilton copium caps for a second and just judge this objective? Yes, George is a killer of a driver, very self-servient, can be selfish at times, but which one of those guys on the grid doesn't have that in their bone? I would argue none of them, because otherwise they wouldn't be in F1. This is the cost of doing business. Now, in that sense, George might be uncommon amongst uncommon men, but nevertheless, is this the time? Rhetoric question, mate. Is this the time to bloody get so down on George and say, "Oh, I knew he was a hater"? Like, is this what we're looking at really, or could it just be that George made a mistake? I think, you know what the joke is, Baxty, in characterising the incident. I want to say, if we're laying blame, I want to say it's like 65-35 George, because Nico Rosberg, again, Nico's coming in for a lot of stick because he pointed that he should.
I've seen what he said.
What did he think? Because I initially, I was like, you know what? I feel like Lewis has got some blame in this. But again, Lewis, it's ironic that we're talking about selfishness, right? Because Lewis has seen what's going on. I think he has to, even though he's got material.
Lewis could have read the situation better, but
I
don't think it's his fault. I think there was clearly not, and this is where I blame Mercedes primarily. You know, Bono and others, George's race engineer, whose name has escaped me at this stage, and Toto, is that there just wasn't the communication there. According to the document, both of them were about to start a quick lap. George goes to pass Sainz. I think Lewis didn't know, or there was just a miscommunication. He thought he was getting a tow and was going to make the pass, and then they ended up colliding. And I think, could they have both read the situation better? Yes. But I think when you're in qualifying trim, the drivers are in a very different mindset to how they are in the race. And I think that it's where you need your team to manage you. And I think what they should, if the cars have been fueled adequately, I don't know their fuel levels, then what they should have done is got George to back out. Then he follows Lewis, gets a bit of a tow, because look, George went out in Q2.
Yeah.
So, you know, it ended up costing George getting into Q3. So, I mean, you could argue that's punishment enough, but
chaos, mate.
I think Lewis can probably get a podium tomorrow. I think it's very likely that he can get a podium. So,
it feels very Hungary 2007. This, like, it's very techie. I just think I would have liked of my driver. I agree with you. It's absolutely more George's fault than is Sir Lewis's. But I don't know. Maybe this is one of those ones where it's just quality and it's a momentum game. I'm not coming off the loud pedal. I'm not. Don't care what's going on in front of me, especially if it looks for a second like George in front of me is giving me the outside line. I don't know. So maybe in that sense, I'd agree with you. I think Nico is probably a bit harsh on Lewis.
Well, I did. Some Lewis Hamilton fans have gone mad about this, but actually, and I think they've gone a bit too hysterical as always, but somebody did point out, they said he kind of has to take this line so as in order for him to not basically admit that he was at fault for the crash in 2016.
Wow.
I think that's probably going a little bit too deep, but it's a nice little theory that I saw out there. Credit to F1 Jordan for that one. But
it's very similar.
Yeah, very similar incidents. Yeah.
Oh, is it on the same part of the track as well?
No, theirs was at turn 4. This was down the main straight.
It was on
down
the
into turn 1. Yeah,
it was on the left hand side as you look at it going forward, rather than
yeah.
Oh, mate.
I just want to add one thing, and it actually ties back into Monaco. This was the worst timing for George Russell to have this happen after what happened in Monaco, with the whole.
Mate.
Oh, could you let me pass Lewis?
Oh,
and I just George, that was so dumb. Like,
Yeah, all right then, Baxter. I'm gonna see that. I'm gonna raise you. So I agree
Yeah.
with you, but the only reason why I identify with George in this situation, Baxty, I would do the same. I would do the same, and I would do worse each and every single time. I would. I would try for it. Now I'm not quite as far as when I put a helmet on. I'm not quite Schumacher levels of skullduggery, but as a shot to nothing, I can't blame. I tell you what, Baxi, I would like to see Lewis do this more often. I know Lewis doesn't really have that in his. That's not in his fabric.
He doesn't need
really.
it.
Yeah, most of the time he doesn't need it. He's not in his fabric really. But I think there is. In my old age, as long as I've been watching F1 Baxter, I think there's something to be said for agency and endeavour because you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. How about?
Actually,
do you know what I mean?
I'm all for him doing that, absolutely. But I think you have to analyse the situation. We saw the positivity of that attitude from George in Zandvoort, where he said he basically forced Mercedes into pitting him because he said, I need to be on the soft tyres. I'm coming in whether you like it or not, have those soft tyres ready. And that ended up costing Lewis because he didn't have a rear gunner. I mean, Max was going to win that race anyway, but it ended up costing Lewis a rear gunner, and it actually ended up costing. George was able to benefit and get a podium because Lewis's tyres died on their arse afterwards. And this was an example of where you can get it wrong as well. I mean, Mercedes basically should have said to George, look, the gap to Leclerc is big enough that you're not going to get sucked into a penalty. If he was right on Lewis's gearbox and he was quicker, then I think Mercedes would have considered the move, but he was nowhere near quick enough. Lewis was going after Ocon to potentially get a podium, and quick shout out to Ocon because he was epic last weekend. But I just, George got that situation wrong, and what he needed was a clean weekend, and now all of a sudden he's hit Lewis and it's all blown up again, which is not what was needed at all. And he just,
I would agree with you, Betsy. He definitely needed to try and keep his nose clean this week. But I picture this question, Baxty, is, and I've got to be careful here with my words, because entitled is a word that's often used in this circumstance that I think is a bit of a misnomer. It is the fact that George feels comfortable now making these requests, and that was an outrageous request. I don't hate it completely because I probably would do the same thing in George's situation. Yeah. But it was an outright. The second one was an outrageous request to invert the positions for no reason. But he didn't have the information, etc., etc. We could argue that back and forth. But is the fact that George has no shame in making these requests that he knows are going to go across the internationally syndicated broadcast, because that's one of the few plot lines that's a bit juicy this year, right? With Max Verstappen clearly on his way to his third championship in 3 years. Is this indicative of George getting a bit comfortable? Maybe Baxley, or is this just George Russell and who he
That's
is?
That's just George.
Just going to be a killer.
Generally, I have no issue with it. George is there to win and he wants to do what's best for himself. And look, he was frustrated because he threw away a podium. Let's be clear. He nailed or lucked out on the strategy. You can say what you want. I think he lucked into it by coming in when he did. He was in P3 and he threw it away. Now, let's be clear. He threw it away. He should have had P3, and he made a mistake and it cost him 2 places. And he was frustrated. I think he was trying to find a way around that. And I think he got muddled. I've seen some people criticising him for the directness in which he deals with people, but let's not forget F1 is a pressurised environment. You've got to be clear.
Yes, absolutely.
And he was, but Mercedes handled it very well. They were just like, yeah, sure, George, all right. Completely ignored it. Because the position was safe. If the position was under threat, then I think maybe they may have thought about it. But George didn't have the pace to stay with Lewis anyway, and Leclerc's pace was all over which is terrible.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Baxley. I can't wait to see how this story unfolds over the 2023 and 2024 seasons. Should Lewis choose to stay on? Going to be fascinating, mate. Talk to me about Fernando Alonso very quickly, getting standing ovations at every turn, and for once beaten by his teammate Mr. Who would have thunk it,
Well, he
Baxty?
damaged his car in Q1,
This
didn't
is
he?
true. This is
Yeah,
true.
and
But he said
that was the problem.
But he said that didn't account for, as far as the delta between him and Max, that was probably a tenth or two of the delta, and that he did a bit of a mea culpa in the interview post race that he should have still been higher. It's a bit of a shame for Fernie that he couldn't. That now his chances, barring an act of God tomorrow, his chances of getting the 33rd at his home Grand Prix
Yeah. No, he's gone out.
zero.
Well,
What a shame.
they already were zero because he's not driving a Red Bull. So let's be very clear. I think
true.
unless he's in a Ferrari, but I mean Ferrari disaster class all over the shop.
God, what is going on with them?
I could go on a rant about what happened in Monaco. I could go on a rant about what happened today. I just, I mean, thankfully Carlos nailed it for them
for once.
But Leclerc didn't. I know his car had a problem. Let's be clear, but
has he checked out already, Baxty? Has he got the AMG Petronas spectacles
not yet.
on?
Not yet. No. Give it a year or two and maybe, but I think at the moment he's happy with Ferrari. So
really,
yeah.
Baxty, how can he be? He's just got to be like. I think he's got to be dying inside at this point, Baxty. This is.
Yeah, I mean, today was unavoidable. I think there was a problem with the new. I think it was maybe a problem with the new update on the car, and it didn't go well for them. Hopefully, he can. I mean, from the sounds of things, they weren't actually able to diagnose the problem. Basically, the car went into parc ferme and they couldn't touch it. So honestly, just break parc ferme, take a cheeky pit lane start, and just set him up with the best downforce you can, and just say, right, run the hard tyres till the end of the race. We'll see you on the last lap when you can pit, and then see how far you get. Do a Hamilton style drive from last year, but.
Oh, Baxter, you're clearly expecting Father Christmas to jump down your chimney this year, because Ferrari, unfortunately, don't have that sort of rational-minded approach to F1, and they've proven that over the past couple of years, mate. Don't expect things from people
nightmare situation
they're not capable of, mate. All right, then, let's talk about updates very quickly as we round third base, because I wanted to get Baxter, indulge me for a second here. I haven't had a bout of Lewis Hamilton copium probably since Zandvoort last year. I haven't allowed myself to indulge in the Lewis is gonna win sort of stuff. But this qualification, I did. When Lewis had dropped it with a couple of minutes remaining to the session, I saw that the devil was tempting me to indulge in a bit of the old Lewis Hamilton copium, thinking that he potentially might be second on the grid, drop it on front row. Let me ask you the question this way, Baxty. Is it time for a bit of Mercedes copium on the back of these upgrades? Are we good to go on saying that Mercedes have made a material step forward with the new side pods, new front suspension, and a couple of other bits and bobs, the mirror changes that they've made since they've now got side pods and don't need them? Step forward or a bit premature?
Give it time. I think Lewis is definitely feeling a bit more comfortable. I think George is struggling a lot more than Lewis is. I think that you could make the argument that these upgrades have been made with Lewis in mind, which is understandable. He's still your World Championship driver at this stage. I think Lewis maximised his performance in Monaco. I know Monaco is the worst place to bring these kind of updates to, but they had to. Everything was on schedule. He was behind at least one Red Bull. He was behind Alonso. He was behind both the Ferraris. I know Leclerc got a penalty, but he was behind both of them. And he was behind an absolute god tier lap from Ocon. So you know what? Fair play. And today, he's behind Verstappen. He's behind one Ferrari. He's behind Lando Norris, who again a god tier lap,
mate.
God tier lap from Lando. Well,
that
god tier qualifying. He was quick all session. I mean, brilliant by Lando.
Loving that.
And obviously he was behind Gasly again, who had a really good session. But of course, Gasly got a penalty or two penalties for impeding, so he's up to P4. I think he's done the best he could with that position. So cautious optimism. they are bringing more stuff to a lot more races. James Allison seems motivated. I mean, if I'm Red Bull and you're seeing James Allison this motivated, you're just going to be a little bit, you're like,
Pause the thought.
okay, all right, we've got to step our game up here because we know they know how good James Allison is.
Oh mate, so impressed by that guy. Every time he gets on the mic, I'm just like, yeah, you shouldn't be able to gauge that the relationship between competence and articulation, vocab, isn't always proportionate, right? You shouldn't judge somebody on the way that they enunciate. But listen, every time I hear that James on the mic, I'm thinking, you know what? How did you let him leave? We wouldn't be here in the first place if you hadn't outsourced him to Ineos. And I know that was his dying wish or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, I know he built the W13 because obviously that he started the process of it and then stepped away and handed it over to Mike Elliott. But I think he's kind of now come in and had a chance to look at it and go, right, okay, we need to go down this Red Bull route, reconfigure, and just give ourselves every opportunity to get back to the front of the grid. And James Allison designed a winning Ferrari. That's the quality of the bloke. And he also won World Championships with Renault. But, a winning Ferrari, that's hard to do.
Mate, he's not bad as James. He's got pedigree, that fella. I feel a lot happier and I can sleep a lot easier at night knowing that he's back on board. All right, then, so we've nailed Mercedes. Talk to me about Ferrari very quickly in those updates. I maybe he's quicker, mate, but I don't like that this Ferrari doesn't have those louvers that Ted Kravitz talks about with his little demonstrative.
Yeah, I think this kind of speaks to perhaps a potential issue with the regs that there just seems to be one optimal thing. In the last regs, we did have a little bit of divergence. You had the low rake and high rake concepts, and that was kind of consistent across the entire thing. But it does look like this downwash that Red Bull got and the cutout side pods rather than the no side pods is the way to go. We saw how effective Aston Martin have been at bringing that update to the car this year and making a huge step forward in performance. Mercedes, I think, are heading in that direction. Ferrari are now starting to learn as well. And I think you do need the variety there. If everyone's just got the same car, you're basically becoming a spec series. True. Now, I know side pods aren't the key of the performance. It's all from the floor. And we saw a lot of flaws in Monaco and also this weekend.
We did see a lot of flaw at Monaco in particular.
I mean, you've seen the extreme of the Red Bull, which best floor on the grid, obviously, so detailed. So, the Ferrari and the Mercedes, not quite so. Then you saw the Williams today that has no Venturi tunnels at all. None. God. I'm like, what on earth is going on here? And you think James Vowles has been going with 20, we're so far behind the curve, 20 years away. Because you
change your car, to quote Christian Horner. Change your effing car.
Yeah.
You're running this Tesco's basics floor and wondering why you've got those speed. It's interesting, that Baxty.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to see who's going to be. There's going to be, at some point, I'm hoping sooner rather than later for the sake of competitiveness. But you can already see Baxty at some point. Somebody's going to have on Twitter the side by side of the floor as per Red Bull's RB19 floor as at Monaco being hoisted up, and the floor of another team that have just replicated it exactly, almost one for one. It's a matter of which one of these guys, probably Mercedes, could replicate it as soon as possible.
You know that Toto Wolff has got a load of aerodynamicists and just gone, right, that one. You are doing nothing but looking at these pictures of the floor.
That one.
Nothing.
Get that one.
That one and make it better.
Yeah, that one. Now, please.
Yeah.
Is it done yet? Hurry up.
Yeah.
They'll be.
I mean, obviously, the Red Bull isn't all about the floor. They're doing things with their suspension as well, which make it. I mean, just perfect,
anti-dive,
just balance,
all this other stuff.
Yeah.
There's all this stuff that I just don't understand, Baxty, that's going on, which means that Max is, and I think, ironically, final point on this, I think all this anti-dive stuff that I will never understand.
Yeah,
mate, absolutely no chance. But it lends itself, if we're talking about Checo's kind of falling away in terms of being a competitor in the championship, I think this is the story. Whenever we write the story on the 2023 championship, we're going to have to talk to anti-dive. We're going to have to talk to the evolution of the tyres and the ability to manage them in the race and even get them to the optimum temperature window during a qualifying session. And all of the above is something that Max probably didn't excel at in the first instance, but he's learned and he's developed as a driver. And those that are doing well this year are getting on board. Those who aren't, mention no names, Charlie Leclerc, mention no names, Checo Perez, probably as quick as both of those aren't getting their head around these other issues, tyres, tyre deg, anti-dive, all this other stuff. Interesting, mate. Interesting. Going to be a techie race tomorrow, right? Go on then. Picks for the race tomorrow. Who you got?
Max, obviously.
Of course. Go on then.
I do think. Look, I think it'll be Carlos and Lewis on the podium with him.
Let's go.
I don't think that McLaren had great qualifying pace. I'm not sure the race pace is going to be too hot. Shout outs to friend of the pod, Rory, but he said that the race pace is going to be pain. I can see the Alpines doing well. Alonso's going to be on a charge. Actually, I'm going to put this. I want chaos. I'm going to put this one out there. Do Aston Martin put team orders on Lance Stroll?
Oh my God!
Just going to put that one out there. Do they put team orders on Lance Stroll?
I
think they should, but he is the boss's son, so they're under no obligation to do so.
My gosh. This is chaos. Here's what it is with Alonso. I've said this. I think as far as our personality inside the car, I think I can identify quite well with Fernando Alonso. Quite good at putting myself in his position. I reckon here's what Fernando will say. Just oh shoot, it's Spain. Oh, that changes everything. I think had it been another Grand Prix, I think Fernando would have just been like, you know what, just give it to Lance, and the next like 18 races or whatever, I'm going to just destroy him anyway. So he can take this one non-threat. But because it's Spain, techie, mate.
If Lance is holding Fernando up, which I don't think he will, let's be honest, but if Lance is holding Fernando up, I can see Alonso going, get him out of the way now, and then this is where the blow-up comes. This is me going full chaos merchant here, but I would love to hear Mike Crack come on the radio and say, Lance, move out the way. I would love to hear that.
You know the joke as well, Baxty. I don't think it will happen because I think Lance is... I think there's deference there, isn't it? Every time you hear Lance talk about Alonso, it's almost like he's a teenager again and meeting the two-time champion for the first time. You'll have seen that infamous picture that they took many, many moons ago. I still think Lance is in that. He's very well aware that he's the young Padawan in this equation. And I don't think he would even, if Alonso's on the attack, unless it's for a player, it's techie. Depends what they're fighting for.
Right. Here's how I see it. You just called Lance the young Padawan. He's been around since 2017.
True.
He's not a young Padawan anymore.
True.
Yeah, and this is, this can be for another pod, but I'm just going to put this thought out there. With Honda coming to Aston Martin in 2026, they need to have a serious think about the position of Lance Stroll, because I think he's going to cost them championships, personally. If they're in that position.
Gosh. What are we doing here?
Lawrence might need to get vicious. I mean, Lance has always said, if I'm not good enough, I'm happy for Dad to fire me. But let's be honest, we know why Lawrence is doing this, to make his son world champion. I don't think it's going to happen.
No, I think that's a bit ambitious from Papa Stroll. Bloody Nora, that's techie. Was he round fourth base, mate? I could talk about that another 30 minutes, but
that's why I'm saying we can save it. We need Shez here for this one.
Yeah. We'll save it for another podcast, man. Shout out to Shez. Baxty, you're a legend. That has been another Shakedown for co-host Baxty. Catch him at Baxty BF1. Some of the best content in F1 on all of the YouTubes, at Baxty B on Twitter for all of the hot takes and all of the insights. This is why Baxty B makes the big bucks. I have been Cameron. Do me a favor, scroll to the top if you're listening on a podcasting platform. 5-star reviews, because Purple Sector's each and every single time 2023. Like, comment, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Same time, not the same time. We'll be back Wednesday, Thursday next week, hopefully. But between now and then, hug somebody that you love. Look but never stare. Peace.